Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third session of the Ideas Conclave hosted by the University of Central Punjab. I am Temina Khan, an art and lifestyle editor at Labas Now. I'm joined by Mehr and Saad, who both have a journalistic background, and they just came out with this amazing, rich, comprehensive history of, it's called Pakistan a Fashionable History, but it's far richer than the title would make you believe. So Mehr and Saad, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we were just speaking previously, just for our viewers, where the idea came to you.
Yes, thank you, Temina. Thank you, University of Central Punjab and Raza for having us on and giving us this platform. Temina, people often ask us this question and they think that there's some, lightning bolt of inspiration. I don't know, they're probably hoping that Gianni Versace came in my dream and told me to do this. That's not entirely true. Inspiration comes from some of the most mundane, some of the most ordinary things that you might consider the norm. It just was one of those mornings when I had to drop my toddler off to school and I'd had a baby, and it was one of those days when everything goes wrong. The cleaning lady, the driver, the cook, everything is just all haphazard. And so I was sitting in my car wearing my tracksuit bottoms and t-shirt, and the car in front had a woman who was also dropping her child off. And what had happened was, there she was dressed to the hilt, 3-piece lingerie, hair done up, makeup, 4-inch heels. And I just thought, well, and she looked as miserable as I felt. And I thought, well, hang on a second, who is telling this poor woman to dress the way that she dresses? I mean, for a country obsessed with marriage and, children, bache paida karna, what's going on? Why do we have an industry that's just not conducive towards women dressing comfortably? And of course, that triggered something inside me. Being an investigative journalist, I just thought I had to figure out what this industry was about, who are the movers and shakers, and why is this happening? And at the time, Saad was doing some fantastic work with a colleague of ours. They produced some of the finest journalism out of Pakistan. And Saad had just happened to message that day saying, hello, hi, and let's do some work together. So it was just a matter of things coming together on that morning.
And I think your period of research was 3 years?
Sorry?
I believe the period of research for this book was 3 years.
Yes, it took us...
from that moment till...
It took us 2 years to compile the book, and then, well, it took us 3 years to get to this point, yes, to actually get around to publishing it.
So at any point, did you want to call it quits and just give up?
Of course, absolutely. There were many times I wanted to call it quits. Saad has often been the victim of many of my voice notes saying, "Bus, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore." But at the end of the day, Temina, there was also the realization that it's not about us. It's not about me. The work that we were doing, it was when we started investigating, when we started researching, the more we discovered, the more we realized that there was no way we could stop. We had to do this book. We had to deliver this for the people of Pakistan, for the country's sake. It wasn't about us. It's never been about us. The book isn't about us. It's about something far larger than us. And given that the reaction we've had, I think we stand validated today in that.
Yeah, it's a first of its kind, and you're sort of pulled in by the beautiful cover, and but you continue reading because it is so rich with facts and things that we just took for granted. I have such a new appreciation for pioneers like Tariq Amin, Seher Sehgal, Faiza Sami, the little tidbits that you share that Faiza Sami used to go to auctions to look for little scraps of like antique cloth just to revive and preserve our stitches. I mean, it's just, and the things that Tariq Amin was called, like he's just a nai. We're so used to him being celebrated at this point, you really take for granted where they came from. And I think it's such a beautiful tribute to pioneers in the industry, and not just fashion. Let's not be misled by the title, because you include actually the fashion designers are just a third of the book. You have the models, the stylists, and the media people who you
Also the
repeatedly,
photographers, yes.
and the photographers. Sorry, Saad. Yes, very huge, huge role they played, as you pointed out, in making fashion more mainstream and available
Yeah,
to the public. So
yeah.
I just want to, how did you decide that along the way, or is it just because both of you are photographers and journalists to give credit to them as well?
No, when we started redoing our research, what we realized was that the designers would not have been designers had there not been the work of the non-designers. I'm talking the stylists, the hair makeup artists, the photographers, the models, the fashion journalists, the publishers. Fashion is not just about a designer. Anyone can go to fashion school and learn how to cut and sew. But in order, that's a designer, that's your work. But in order to create fashion, you're selling a fantasy, you're selling a dream to a market, you're giving art, you're giving voice, you're creating an expression, you're creating a business. So as we did more and more research, we realized that it was actually the non-designers who created the industry. The designers were just making clothes in their homes up until that point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to, how difficult was it to get your hands? Because I feel like we as Pakistanis in general, we really don't archive or document our work. So it must have been so difficult to even get copies of like these shoots that Tapu did with like Amna Haq. That water one is just so gorgeous. So was that a challenge? Was that your area?
Yeah, that was my area, and I'd like to add that as a print journalist, I mean, I've never really been associated with fashion journalism. The closest I ever got was, when I was working at the Friday Times, we had the guys from the guys and the girls from, the Good Times right next door. That's the closest I ever got to fashion journalism. So, but
Physically.
I've always, yeah,
Yeah.
physically, but I've always been a keen observer. And when Mehr obviously came up with the idea of a book on fashion, I was always fascinated by how, this industry came into being. I'm also a musician, and I always point this out that sadly, the music industry, it's not an industry in Pakistan. It's not, as complete as the fashion industry, which is not, as we just mentioned, is not just fashion designers. There's so many livelihoods attached to it. There is a global appeal, there's a global demand. And so things were very different, yes, when we started 3 years ago. This was supposed to be published in India, it was an international publication and whatnot. But then politics came into being, and both countries
Hmm.
were on the brink of war. So we looked at local publishers, and then Meher decided to publish it herself, under Zuka Books, for example.
Right. Right.
So and archives, yes, as Meher mentioned, we both have an investigative journalistic background. And I always, not just because I'm a photographer, but we felt that in addition to the text, photos are very important, archives are very important. And we made it a bit difficult for ourselves because to be honest, I in 2017 at least, I assumed it would be very easy. The archives, we would just ring up the designers, and one of their assistants would just send us a WeTransfer or a Google Drive link, and we'll just start sorting stuff. Sadly, there is no concept, there is no practice of archiving. Even celebrated designers and all the people in the book, they, like, majority of them did not have their archives. So we had to run around, and like, for example, Meher got most of the vintage ads. I had to get a lot of stuff that was published
Right.
in the 80s and 90s in different magazines, especially Newsline. And it's interesting that in the process of these
Mm.
3 years, Herald has shut down, Newsline has shut down, and these magazines were quite fashion heavy back in the days. In fact, I think they were publishing, majorly fashion back in the days. A lot of shoots. I mean, if you pick up the last copy of Herald, which came out, I think, in January 2019, it had nothing to do with
Okay.
fashion. But back in the, like,
Right.
late 80s and 90s, Herald did a lot of stuff, regarding fashion.
I
They would
think
have
you
fashion.
mentioned it when Fifi Harun joined, right?
Yeah, Fifi Harun, when she was a part of it as well, and then she went on to establish her own magazine called Extra as well. But the archives were
Right.
very difficult. We had to go to a lot of these, like, I had to go to Karachi, to all of these old book bazaars, for example. and find stuff over there, which they were very curious. Even though I was buying it off them, they were like, why do you want this? This has no value. And so it's really sad. There is no concept. And I think what makes the book even more special is that all the archives you see inside are very exclusive. And when Mehr was interviewing a lot of the people, she did all the profiles in the book. So they would ask Mehr that, do you have any of our archives? And Mehr would just tell them, yes, Saad has, your archives. And they've all been after me, and I've been giving them their archives. So I'm glad that we've not just actually written a book, or published a book. We've actually given, a lot of archives back to the people who actually created that work. So yeah, I think it's a very special book.
That's amazing. So I just wanted to in working in Pakistan, and especially, I mean, if you're not strictly from the fashion background, but as investigative journalists, and I'm sure you have a lot of contacts in these industries, in the industry. So I just want to ask, did you feel the pressure to just have a positive note throughout? And did you feel the pressure to just not be critical or to include someone, or were you able to be completely objective?
Mehr, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. No, there was, we worked completely objectively. There was no pressure whatsoever. We were not on anyone's payroll. Nobody funded us. In fact, Saad and I put in our own money. And everyone, the pioneers of the industry, were approached. And whoever said yes, which is 97% of them, except for 3 people who said no, they didn't want to be part of it, which is, of course, their right. Everyone else agreed, and we were more than happy to have them in the book.
Right. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of co-collaborators, I just want to ask, what qualities did you value in each other? And what qualities do you think that anyone out there who is thinking of collaborating for any project, be it a book, what qualities are necessary in your co-author or partner?
I think Saad was a wonderful person to work with, and I would certainly encourage many others to work with him, simply because he was very calm. This book was not easy to put together, make no mistake. People have looked at it, they'll be like, oh, what a wonderful book, how lovely, this, that. It was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And I say this as a mother, because when you bring up children, that's the most difficult thing. And this was even more difficult than that. Saad was wonderful because he was very calm. He was very cool-headed. And Saad always had great clarity of thought. There are 2 other people who were part of the team. One is Sonia Rahman, who helped us with our PR. She kept things very focused. She kept things extremely professional, which is a rare thing in Pakistan. And of course, our layout person, Minhaj Ahmed Rafi, who was a dream to work with, because never once did I have to chase him. Never once did I have to run after him. I think if you want to collaborate with people to get things done for projects such as these that are almost impossible in nature, you need to have people who are professional, who respect your level of professionalism, and who have great clarity of thought. There's no room for wishy-washiness in this sort of business, or for any type of book, fiction or non-fiction. Right. You need to have a plan. And I think that's one thing that the 4 of us certainly did. At the end of the day, we all had the same collective goal, and we were all on the same page throughout.
And I think for me, I think professionalism is the most important thing. Working with Mehr, she's very professional. And I actually like sharing the glory with people. Like-mindedness is very important. And, so I think in that regard, I think it was a very good experience. And I'm really big on collaborations. I think people should collaborate. It can be anything, not just a book, for example. And I think we all brought our different abilities and qualities to the book, obviously. I could say this, right now, that Mehr could have done this book easily without me, but I think I must have added some value.
No.
So So yeah, I think I believe, I always like collaborating. As Meher mentioned, Sonia, Rahman, and I, we've done a lot of stories together. I also write at times, and I also do the photos, but I'm very happy, handling the visual side of things. And with Sonia, for example, we've collaborated on like a wide variety of stories, for example. And I had always been after Meher that we should collaborate, and I'm glad that she pitched this idea. And I think there's a lot more that we have planned as well. But I think
Absolutely.
collaboration worked well for us. Yes.
Well, I think Meher is great, and she insists on being, recognized side by side with you. Anytime I've had any correspondence with her, or any sort of
That's true.
interview or anything arranged, she insists, no, Saad, my co-author, has to be present. So I think you were an integral part, and obviously it's a visually beautiful, and like you said, the archives that you hunted up. So I think that deserves its credit. And so I just let's just move on to, well, speaking of making it visually appealing, as I think it's a bit doing a disservice to call this a coffee table book. I don't want people, it is pretty, but I don't want people to just put it on the table and put a a candle on top of it. I think it's worth reading and appreciating.
Mina, that was part of the plan. It was always
Okay.
no, you see, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when it comes to history of Pakistan, it's always written in a black and white format through a particular lens, which is generally
Right.
speaking
Right.
political or strategic. And more often than not, it's written by a non-Pakistani, none of which I have a problem with. By all means, write about whatever lens you want to write. But increasingly, I've seen that over the years, less and less people are aware of Pakistan's social or cultural history. And Saad has a great example. Saad, the Coke Studio one that you have.
Yeah.
It's shocking when we speak to people of the younger generation, and they have absolutely no idea whatsoever of what happened before the last 10 years, before the previous decade. And so it was always the plan was, right, let's try to engage the current generation in a way that speaks to them. And this is something that Minhaj, our art director, pointed out to us. When we gave him the text, we literally handed over a Microsoft document to him and we said, do whatever you want to do. Because neither Saad nor I, we're not graphic designers, we're not artists. And so we said, here you go. And his point was exactly this, that look, you've done your research. You've got these beautiful visuals, original by Saad, as well as the archives, as well as fashion shoots by designers. But none of this is going to work unless you present it in a way that's going to really hold people's attention. And every single page, if you go through the book, there's no repetition of design. Every single graphic that you see is original. It's Minhaj's original work. And so therefore it is a coffee table book, but it's also a research book. It's also a social history. It's a reference point. I'd like to refer to the book as a starting point more than anything else.
And you
Okay.
mentioned collaborations and partnerships. I think what's very important is when you have creative freedom, for example. I would often ask Meher for some sort of input regarding the photos, but Meher would say, "Saad, this is purely your department. I'm not going to say anything." So I think the same thing went with Minhaj. Like Meher said, we just gave him a lot of text, like 30,000-40,000 words, and it was up to
Yes.
him. He could do whatever he wanted, and he actually designed the book keeping the youth in mind, because to be honest, even though the book is historical and whatnot, but it is directed towards them, because we've always felt this disconnect that kids have nowadays. There's a lot they don't know because of the distortion that exists in our textbooks also.
Very
Right.
true. True.
So that's so it was completely your department. Did you feel did you have a sort of uniform vision for it, the way it looked visually? Or did you just go by what was available since there was such a dearth of archives?
So I didn't get that.
Sorry, I'll just repeat. I just want to say, did you have a vision for the way the book would look? or the kind of material that you would choose. एक uniform look थी आपके दिमाग में, or या you were just going as you found material, since there was काफी masla with the archive.
Yeah, so the look is obviously Minhaj's work, all of it.
Right.
As for the archives or the content, I think since the book is like, it's like a chronology, it's like an evolution. So that's how the content comes into being. We start off with, I personally, they're my photographs. They're my favorite photographs on the book, where we have TJs, from Sadr in Karachi. Sadr is a place very close to my heart. I feel like there's a lot of stories over there. So that's where the book starts off from initially. And also we have, yeah.
Yep, that's Saad's original photography.
Also there's this
Okay, it's brilliant.
Barkat Ali Sari Wale, which is again the Sadr of Lahore, for example, Mall Road. So I think that's how we had designed it. But I'll be honest, we were obviously entirely dependent also on the archives that we were able to gather, in the sense. And yes, they also dictated, but there is still a lot of unpublished archives that we still have, which obviously did not go into the book because, Mehr mentioned, we printed this ourselves. This was designed, it was like everything was in-house in a way. So we had to be very selective in terms of the archives as well. So yeah.
Okay. But there's some
I mean, the
such
archives that we have really
visuals,
warrant a
like,
book of their own.
yeah, maybe a supplement or a part 2 should be coming up. But I just want to show, the.
I have to do
It's just
that.
brilliant
Saad
to
will
see,
do that.
like this was, like, I think this was Tapu's work. There was such a freedom and a creativity and a lack of worry for censorship, or, actually even social media trolls probably. So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
feel
even
like,
in
would
2000,
you say that?
sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to add this, that if you look at the work back in the 80s and 90s, I felt that they were more creative, they were more experimental, where compared to, I mean, I'm not a fashion photographer, but I'm a photographer, and I can at least comment on the photography that's being done nowadays. I I don't see a lot of creativity. I don't see a lot of experimentation. Uh, like all the shoots look the same to me. But so hands off to these guys who are like the trailblazers, who actually, they experimented, and and
They really
you
did. Like, Meher was mentioning one photo shoot with Amin Gulji and Tariq Amin, I think, where he just covered the models with clay and for a jewelry shoot. And, it's just, like you said, now it's, I guess, that was what Meher was mentioning also, that fashion had to become a viable business. So it had to become commercial for it to survive. But the trade-off is that maybe you do lose a little bit of
I don't know if
freedom. So, and
I
you
don't
do
know
have
if Pakistan was really ever willing to. Pakistan's not really had the freedom to define its own style without having external influences. So, which is why when you look at these people, they were free of those external influences, and they were just, I mean, there was no limit to their creativity, and they weren't trying to prove a point. They didn't want to create safe dressing or safe spaces. There was a lot of individuality that was celebrated, and it was accepted. Nowadays, I think there's zero individuality, there's zero creativity, there's zero innovation. And what you have is what is known as clone culture.
Oh, yes, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, clone culture is pretty. That's very well
Quite
put.
sad.
So, I wanted to talk about a little bit about the role of social media, which wasn't really touched upon, because I think you covered quite enough. So, do you see that what sort of role do you see that playing in the fashion history of art?
Meena, I look, people often ask me, what hope do you have? Social media has given the younger generation something that we didn't have. Our generation did not have. We were constantly backing off we grew up under the shadow of 9/11. So we were constantly battling off this narrative that was being pushed upon us. And when we were asked, well, all right, fine, if this isn't what you are, then what are you? We didn't really have an answer to that. And I see the younger generation really owning their identity and celebrating it. But my only concern is that what is being generated out on social media, right? So for example, right now on Instagram, tie-dye seems to be the rave. Well, that's fantastic. You know, you have tie-dye t-shirts, you have tie-dye kurtas, you have tie-dye kaftans, you have tie-dye shalwars, you have tie-dye dupattas. This is brilliant, fantastic. Glad that you guys are finally, you know, doing something different, but it's the same stuff. Again, you have creativity and it sort of expands, but there's no growth. You know, you'll have 100 people doing the same thing, using the same technique, but there's very little growth, there's very little innovation. And I think right now, young Pakistanis have not really harnessed the power of social media. The one or two that did manage, I think Kandil Baloch was one of them, who became Pakistan's first supposedly Kim Kardashian. And the way that she dressed, the way that she did her hair, the way that she did her makeup, it wasn't just bold. I think bold is just a very, very general way of describing her. She was creating an identity. Not many people are able to do that, even though you have all the tools and you're, you know, I feel that the literary industry has done a lot more of that in terms of defining themselves. You see Pakistani authors literally putting their thoughts out when it comes to their books, when it comes to their work, when it comes to sharing their thoughts via the written word. I see that they are certainly doing far more and utilizing social media far more than, say, fashion designers or models or stylists or photographers. Tapu recently, you know, was using social media during lockdown to conduct these little, I suppose, workshops of photography, which is brilliant. Which is brilliant. The whole idea of social media is to communicate, is to connect with people. And if you're not doing that, then you're not utilizing it properly. Forget potential, you're just not using it properly.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just wrap up because I want to then open the, the talk to the students for them to ask you questions. Just for both of you, anything during this research process, anything, what was the most surprising thing you learned or saw?
Two things stand out for me in terms of most surprising. One, that Tariq Amin went to Studio 54, which just, it still blows my mind given what an institution Studio 54 was. And anyone who's into fashion, culture, or art, or music should know about the legacy of Studio 54. And secondly, how Seher Sehgal actually set up Libas. You know, people see Seher Sehgal, you know, high up in a, you know, ivory tower as this undisputed queen of fashion. But very little, you know, very few people know how hard she worked and how her story is that of an ordinary person literally hustling when she tried to set up Libas, the magazine. I mean, for me, when she told me that she stood on a cold, frosty morning in November in London outside the headquarters of W.H. Smith, just like any ordinary person, that was such a humbling moment for me. And it really taught me a lot. It really did. About in this day and age, people expect to become superstars overnight. And that just taught me that no. Yep. Celebrities, lakh rupees mil jaye overnight, you know, 1 million followers on social media. Thank you very much. It doesn't happen that way. It does not happen that way. It really, really does not. You have to hustle.
In a way, this book is a celebration of hustling. So.
It really is. It really is. It's a celebration of hard work. It's a celebration of originality, and it's a celebration of individuality.
And I think for me, the surprising thing that I discovered, you know, in the process was how in the late 80s or even in the mid 80s, when Pakistan was being drastically Islamized, you know, this entire industry was, being given a proper structure by all the people, that are in the book, for example. So it's very fascinating for me, at least, how what I consider a very dark time in the history of Pakistan, all this creative experimentation, be it makeup artists, photographers, designers, all of this was happening, like simultaneously. And it was also a bit maybe unintentional. I mean, I'm pretty sure these guys, they were having fun. They were experimenting, but they probably did not realize what they were actually, or the direction they were heading in, which is now what we have, which is the fashion industry.
It just goes to show one has to be resilient and you have to carry on no matter what happens.
Yes, so I'm just gonna check and take the questions that the students have for Mehr and Saad. So, Saad, there's a question from a student asking, what is the scope of photojournalism in Pakistan?
Okay. Yeah. So the scope, you'll be surprised that, I started 15 years ago and I expected a lot of people, to follow in that pursuit, but sadly there is not, there are not a lot of photojournalists out there. And I always encourage a lot of females, especially, because I always point this thing out that, there are a lot of sensitive issues if we talk about photojournalism where I'm not supposed to be there. For example, there may be issues surrounding women, for example. So there's a lot of scope in that regard. There's a lot of story, and it's not just just still photography anymore. There's a lot of like videography, which also comes in under photojournalism in a way. So there's a lot of scope in that regard over there. I like what a lot of people are doing, but it's more like travel videos. Like they go to really nice places up north. They like to show places, like beautiful places in Skardu and Gilgit. But there's not a lot of there's what is missing is the human interest factor. Mehr and I were having this discussion a few weeks ago that no one talks about the people over there.
Yeah.
How is it for them, living in literally the middle of nowhere? They don't have the same resources we have in KLI, which is Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad. And how, they're like really in terms of, facilities and whatnot, things are very difficult for them. So, so all of these things need to be highlighted, and it's through photojournalism that you can actually do this. There's a lot of scope. A lot of people are only on Instagram, and they're doing photojournalism. They have a great audience. Both boys and girls I've seen, they have these fantastic pages. And the good thing is, we've always struggled pitching stories to editors. It's very difficult. You come up with an idea, you send these pitches out to all these editors, and it just gets rejected. I really liked what Tariq Amin in one of our previous sessions mentioned, that he said my Instagram is like my magazine. I can put stuff about what I had for breakfast. I can show myself gardening in the evening or in the afternoon, whatever. So the good thing is that you are not dependent on these major news publications anymore, in a way, if you are able to build a good audience. I see a lot of younger kids curating, that's the term, for Instagram pages where they're making their grids and whatnot, and they're putting in a lot of hard work, and it's being rewarded obviously through the number of likes they have or the people who are actually there. And there's a lot of stories that are coming out as well. So that's what needs to be
Much.
the
There's
human
so much.
interest.
I think,
Yeah, I mean,
the
we have so
scope for
many unheard voices.
photojournalism is huge. It's
Yeah,
huge.
I mean, there's a lot that still needs to be done, and there's a lot of scope in that sense. But you need to know what the audience wants, and you need to know the issues that are obviously important.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the few fields that artificial intelligence can't take over.
I just think that there's so much. One can just walk down Lahore and through in Sheher mein, go outside, go check out the old cinemas, go check out those people who used to paint those billboards. There's so much out there. Saad has a great story about the Hijra community, the transgender community. Nobody's ever, documented them. There's so much out there. All you have to do is just worry.
Yeah,
Just
when
not
you
worry
talk
about
about
it.
the
Just think.
transgenders community, I did a few stories on them, but I always encourage them, when you talk about scope, I always encourage them that, nowadays it's not as expensive as it used to be, printing film and, developing film buying equipment. With a pretty decent cell phone, a smartphone, you can be a photojournalist. So I
Yeah.
remember, so Sonia and I did this story on on the Khwaja Sira Society in Lahore. And so they were like, you have to teach us photography. And I said, yes, I will do photojournalism workshops for you guys, but I want you to become photojournalists, because I, you should not be dependent on me for your perspective. It has to come from within the community. So this is very important. Imagine having transgender reporters and writers and, photographers documenting their own issues and their own problems. And the same goes for, like, as a male photojournalist in Pakistan, there are certain areas that I may not have access to. I'm not supposed to have access to. And I always give this example, like, for example, if someone wants to highlight, the bad condition, the poor condition of a maternity ward of a government hospital somewhere in Pakistan, I'm not supposed to be there, because it's a sensitive area where a guy is not supposed to be there. So this is where a female photojournalist comes in, and she can go and document, she can go and talk to these people, because a lot of these stories have taken me up north to Pakistan, where again, even if you want to talk to the people, you're only limited. As a male photographer, I can only talk to the men over there. So maybe more females need to go up there and talk to people, these women over there, and obviously they'll have a more comfort level, talking to the to the women over there. So I think that's very important. It could be
Yeah.
videos, it could be an Instagram page. So so you now have all these amazing apps which you can use, to develop a narrative.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so one more question. How have political and social conditions influenced Pakistan's fashion?
That's what the whole book is about. That's the entire book.
Yeah, so that's the answer. Read the book. I think we will wrap up.
You'll have to
Yeah.
read the book, but I'll just do a quick summary. Political and social factors have greatly influenced Pakistani dressing and how we style ourselves and how our silhouette regarding our clothing has changed. There's a lot of material out there. We've documented it in great detail in the book as well, but never ever underestimate the role of politics or social issues in the impact it has on fashion, when it really shouldn't. But that's just Pakistan.
Thank you so much, Mehr. Thank you, Saad. Thank you, University of
Thank
Central
you for
Punjab
having us.
and our viewers. This amazing book will be available at the last word from tomorrow onwards. So I urge
Yes.
everyone, not just people who are interested in fashion. It's not about predicting winter trends. It's just a very rich look at our history through not just the clothes, but the entire atmosphere of creativity and pushing boundaries from the 50s to the 2000s, and everyone who played a role in making this industry, which involves not just fashion designers but the karigars and the journalists and photographers. So it's such a rich, enlightening, encouraging book that makes you proud to be Pakistani. You will learn so much that you took for granted. And I think especially the younger generation who's in college right now really, really will benefit from this beautiful, beautiful, easy to read and rich text. So thank you so much and
Thank you.
have a good night. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Love this.
Bye-bye.